afternoon and welcome to today's webinar, From Pilot to Production, AI Leadership in Regulated Financial Services. I'm Penny Horwood and I'm joined today by experts from Microsoft and EPAM, and we're going to discuss how enterprise IT leaders in highly regulated sectors like financial services can move from early AI experimentation to scalable production-ready solutions. So, to these experts, gentlemen, if you'd like to introduce yourself. Mik, could we start with you, please?
Hi there, Mik Quinlan. I've been in technology for about 25 years. I work at EPAM in the Microsoft Business Group, and I specialize in AI.
Super, thank you very much. Stephen.
Good afternoon, everyone. Steve Holdstock, play the role of insurance CTO, technologist in the London markets and the commercial and specialty markets more broadly.
Great. And Naveen?
Hi, good afternoon and good morning to folks in the US. I'm Naveen Dhar. I'm a senior director at Microsoft. I'm part of the industry team and I work across different insurance companies. My background has been working for insurers before I joined Microsoft.
Great stuff. Thank you very much and welcome to all of you. Before we get into the discussion, I just want to remind the audience that we very much welcome your questions, which you can enter via the box that should be on your screen. I will see those questions as you send them in, and we'll try to find an opportune moment to put them to the panel. If that doesn't happen during the discussion at the right time, I will ask them at the end of the webinar. And if we run out of time, which has been known, we'll put you in touch directly with the relevant person and they can answer your questions directly. So let's get going. So I want to start by setting the scene. So to each of our panelists, can you give us a brief sense of where you see enterprise clients in insurance and financial services right now? You know, what stage are they on their AI journey? Are most still at the pilot stage, or are we kind of moving into the genuine production scale deployment and that becoming a norm? Just trying to, Naveen, it's probably best that you can sort of start off and give us an overall market view.
Thank you. Yeah, what we're seeing is a clear split. Experimentation is largely behind us. Most insurers and banks have run dozens of pilots, but fewer than 20% have moved anything material in production. The majority is still stuck in pilot mode. Now, these early movers, we call them frontier firms. The data on them is really compelling. Frontier firms are realizing 3 times higher returns compared to the slow adopters, 3 times. And that's not a marginal improvement, that's a fundamentally different trajectory. What they're doing differently and what sets them apart is adopting 3 emerging parallel patterns. And I say parallel because most companies will be in all 3 simultaneously. The first pattern that we see them adopting is human with assistant. Every employee has an AI assistant that helps them work faster and better. The second pattern we see them adopting is human-led agents, where agents join teams as digital colleagues, taking on specific tasks under human direction. And the third pattern we see them taking on is human-led agent-operated, where the humans set directions and agents execute entire flows, checking in as needed. Now, these organizations are no longer asking if, they're asking how far and how fast. They're moving from co-pilots everywhere to outcomes everywhere. They are moving to outcomes at scale. They're rewiring the entire operating model and not just retooling existing processes. The laggards are stuck in pilot purgatory. The shift, I think, in 2026 is going to be decisive. We are going to move from can we build it to can we govern it, scale it, and measure it in EBITDA. The Bain had a interesting technology report where their research indicated that AI leaders were already delivering 10 to 25% EBITDA gains by scaling AI across workflows. So now that gain is the price.
Understood. Okay, that's great. Thanks. Mik, did you want to sort of cover it from a more of a sort of delivery implementation lens?
Yeah, sure. So from a kind of custom development point of view, when you're deploying Azure agents, We have some case of production deployments. We found some of our clients are very risk averse, and some of them haven't even have only just started looking at GitHub Copilot, let alone agent-based application. But we think that's fine because it takes time to understand the tooling and the core paradigms of building and evaluating agents. And the technology is moving faster than use cases, so it's good to get culturally aligned, especially in highly regulated industries. But it's really important to start because rather than waiting to see, because your competitors have probably already started.
Great. And Stephen, could you add an insurance-specific angle?
Yeah, of course. And it's interesting to see how our different opinions and observations from different markets come together and weave into an interesting story. So insurance is wide and varied across personal lines, life and health, P&C, commercial, specialty markets. We can see a lot of activity across the markets at an individual level. It's common to see users adopting corporate tools with their own tasks, drafting an email, transcribing a meeting, searching their knowledge base, talking to their data sets. I think that's kind of yesteryear's capability. Everybody's broadly happy with that. At a team level, we can see many companies are adopting data ingestion services, and this is a major boost, especially to commercial and specialty insurance firms, as the market tends to be very document-centric from client and right across the chain. Getting some structured data into the placement process has become the next table stakes to aim for. Legal tech is making some good progress with contract and policy drafting also, I think. We are starting to see POCs advance around triaging new submissions on the placement side. Some underwriters are trialing and have advanced research agents. And we have some autonomous agents that are starting to appear online and in call centres to take calls around first notification of loss in the claims world. There are examples of POCs and low adoption examples across large parts of the value chain. There are also key parts of insurance and financial services more broadly, I'm sure, that need to be deterministic, where agents have no role to play. However, whilst there are always exceptions, at the moment, I'm not seeing wide autonomous deployment of autonomous agents that's changing the operating model just yet. I think that's what we're all sort of looking for evidence of.
Yeah, okay, that's interesting. So, Stephen, you're probably the best place then to give us a steer on, so, some of these examples you've mentioned, what does, I suppose, production-ready agentic AI look like in an insurance context? And how does that differ from what a lot of organizations perhaps think it means, when they're starting out?
So in the most basic terms, there are minimum standards that our regulators, our business partners, and our clients expect from us. And the critical tools that we use to conduct business are subject to these standards, from cybersecurity, data handling, audit controls, deterministic decision-making, and much more. These are typically reinforced by enterprise risk management policies and the like. Experimenting and learning with vibe coding tools is incredibly good fun, and getting some really quick early demos and proof of concepts can be done incredibly fast and with some really convincing user interfaces. I recommend that everybody give this a go. You don't need to be technical to do it. This fast start is incredibly useful.
Subject, vibe coding, isn't it? Sorry.
It is. No, indeed. We could do a full hour on that alone. This fast start is incredibly useful for testing and learning POC spikes, for creating local personal tools also, which might in the future become the new version of Shadow IT and the challenge there. The challenge comes that when you look at the steps that are needed to take your concept and lift it to production standards to ensure that it is supportable in a live business environment, and that one that passes the IT controls to ensure the appropriate compliance, it's a completely different quality of solution. It's in a different category. These aren't necessarily specific challenges to insurance, but a quick example might be a quick vibe-coded POC for data ingestion that works on a small sample of test data, but doesn't declare its interpretations, its assumptions, its nearest match translations, and inserts defective data or insights into the business process, so that there isn't the repeatability, the auditability, the data lineage and explanation of its workings, let alone traditional sort of NFR system quality attributes and supportability. There's just a difference, and there's a different methodology to taking one through that cycle.
Okay, and Naveen, did you want to add anything from a sort of Microsoft perspective?
Yeah, I just want to build on to what Stephen was talking about, right? So at Microsoft, we think about production-ready agentic AI, and I think about it in 3 layers, right? So the first part of it is experience, right? So you can use tools that are, Stephen talked about vibe coding. We talk about Copilot tools that Microsoft provides, a lot of other applications that get built into tools that people already use. The second aspect of this is agents that are orchestrating and task-specific agents. Like, for example, Stephen talked about this in the prior question. We talked about submissions, FNOL, case management, where humans are firmly in that loop. And then that last layer, which I think is very important for it to become production ready, is the foundation layer, which where all your security, governance, controls exist. Now, what separates somebody who's going to go production ready, somebody who's leading the charge, and separates them from somebody who's just a pilot shop, isn't the experience layer. It's not even the agents. I think it's the discipline at the foundation layer. When you're evaluating, harnessing, you're red teaming, you're drift monitoring, you're clearly defined roles at the claims floor. Now, most organizations underestimate this last mile. And a demo agent and a production agent are not iterations of the same thing. They are fundamentally different engineering artifacts. And I think that's the journey that people need to think through as they think about production ready.
Okay, that's interesting, because I was about to ask a question about where companies are kind of getting stuck between POC and scaling, but we've actually just had a question that asks it possibly better than I was going to, so we'll go with that. So Naveen said that most insurers and financial services companies have run dozens of pilots, but implied that most are not scaling. So what's the most common false positive signal that makes leaders think they're ready to scale when they're not, or vice versa? Mistaking a promising POC for one that actually won't work in real life.
Well, let me take that, Penny. So okay. It's very interesting what Naveen said, because we're seeing a similar thing. So when an organization prototypes, it doesn't take into account those foundational aspects. Right, so everything that Naveen said, compliance, security, regulatory, testing for accuracy, what Steve said, making sure you've got enough training data, you've got a wide spread of it. Then when it comes to production, all these come to the fore and it must be addressed all at once. So prototyping should really check the high risk areas and take some time up front to think, what could prevent this from going live? Who do we have to talk to in our business that would have a say in whether we can promote an agentic system to production? That could be like part of the 3 layers of defense, the 3 lines of defense in the insurance and regulated industries. So don't defer these questions. It's way cheaper to build them in from the beginning than retrofit later. So if you do this, you'll have a much better picture of what it takes to get the agents live and more likely to be successful.
If I can add, Penny, I think to build on both of that, I'm not sure if people are always piloting or POCing the right things. POCing tends to be much more business feature functional led than it does non-functional system quality led as to how it's going to sit in that environment. And I think potentially a bit of extra due diligence and engineering discipline to make sure that it's properly working as one would intend it to, as we always have done with production code and services. I think we need to apply that as well.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much. So moving more to the sort of platform side of the discussion now, what kind of specific capabilities within the Azure stack are proving most useful for highly regulated industries who are trying to deploy AI at scale, and what's still maturing?
Yeah, I'll take that one. I think going back to the theme of that foundation layer that I talked about, I'm going to talk about 4 capabilities in that same vein. So these 4 capabilities are the ones I think, especially from a regulated industry perspective, are doing most of the heavy lifting here. The first one is Foundry, right? You're talking about content safety, prompt shields, you're talking about groundedness checks built into the model layer. The second piece is around Purview, your sensitivity label, your DLP that follows data into agent reasoning, and not just into documents. The third piece, and this is the newest one, we just kind of announced this in the last Ignite, but this is Agent 365, which is the control plane for agents. With an intra-agent ID, you can now have identity, policy-based access, and integrated defender protection. And the last here is the sovereign and confidential compute for workloads, where data has to remain strictly within boundaries. Now, this is the foundational layer that every frontier insurer deployment that is happening is leveraging. What's still maturing? I believe the agent-to-agent governance that's something that is there's still something that's being worked on. The cost attribution per agent, standardized evals for multi-step reasoning. I would expect significant announcements at Ignite around this. But today, the foundation that exists is solid enough. There is no technical reason to wait.
Okay. Looking at the regulation part of the question, so I mean, obviously every enterprise is subject to regulation of some way, shape, or form. But I think it's fair to say that finance is kind of more heavily regulated than some other sectors. Is there any difference in platform architecture for insurers, for example? Are there any specific guardrails that should be in place from the outset? Mik, did you want to?
Yeah, I'll answer that one. Well, the good thing is Naveen covered quite a lot of it there in the previous answer, but I think that the architecture is essentially the same, right? It's just what dials do you really turn further? So, responsible AI principles have to be there, guardrails have to be there, explainability, transparency. And depending on how critical your flow or the decision the agent is making and the data that it's accessing, for example, in Purview, you can check what sensitive data an agent has looked at or used. And as long as you can translate that out to plain English for the regulator, then being able to understand exactly what's going on is important, whether you're debugging the system or whether you're actually explaining to an outside party what the agent actually did and how it came to its decision.
Great. So moving more to the I suppose the risk and the governance question that we've kind of just started to get at now. So it is said sometimes that regulated firms often face a sort of tension. They have to balance a sort of tension between, innovating at speed, failing fast, and waiting for the sort of internal risk and compliance frameworks to catch up with them. So how are you, Stephen, you're probably the best place to answer this one. How are you advising clients to sort of navigate that potential tension, if indeed it exists, without creating a problem in the longer term?
I think I'd offer guidance in three key areas. So firstly, there is no explicit inherent need for risk and compliance frameworks to be so far behind. If an insurance company is serious about evolving their operations and exploring the potential value that AI might offer their business, then the relevant policies can be created with the right controls, and the first steps can be taken. And policies and controls do not need to be perfect on day one. Very little is perfect on day one, but they need to be iterated in an incremental fashion where we gather proof and we grow confidence. I think, secondly, don't wait to test and learn. Beyond vibe coding or beyond a talk to my document in Copilot, which is very powerful, taking advantage of new tools needs some experimentation. It definitely needs some time to sufficiently master. From context to prompts to skills to process nuance, to integrating to your data sets and knowledge bases and systems via MCP servers. There is a journey to travel here that will help inform and feed back to the risk and compliance work to, again, increment forwards together. And I think, finally, it's common to learn that there are executive initiatives that flow top down in an organisation from the board, seeking extensive benefits and value. And this is well intended, and some are surely very successful. Where we have smaller departments and teams undertaking very specific specialist work in their areas, generic agents aren't too helpful. A bottom-up approach, where we start small, we build capability and confidence, iteratively and incrementally, again, so important to provide functionality that is more relevant to those teams and their specialist work, more adoptable and more useful. It's an approach that also has some really good success. And remember that tech debt, the regulatory debt, we have entered an era where tech has started to evolve so quickly, and we all believe it will continue to do so, and our agents and their frameworks will also need to evolve. So perhaps we will enter some debt cycles or two before correcting this in the next iteration. This is no different than previous technology jumps. We're in that adoption cycle, we're learning, maturing together as a wider industry. I think it's a good place to be.
Okay, so that sort of starting small point that you raised there, is that a way to really bake the kind of auditability and explainability into an agentic architecture from the outset, rather than trying to retrofit those concepts back in later on?
I'm going to chime in here. I think the key here, I think where Stephen was going, and I think Mik mentioned this as well, was getting one regular workflow into production with full governance, even a small one. And even, however narrow the scope is, you will build more institutional trust than 6 months of committee work. And I think that's the key. You have to get risk and engineering on the same side of the table. The trap that we fall into is we treat speed and compliance as a trade-off, and it doesn't have to be. Because end of the day, if you do this right, it should be a big benefit for the whole company, right? So you get real visibility into what data agents are touching. You get real-time protection and detection when the system goes live. You have red teaming stress agents that prompt test prompts, stress prompts, anything before it ships live. You can leverage pre-map control sets for NIST, for EU AI, for NYDFS. So you aren't really starting from a blank page, and building that first one and getting there, I think that's the key. And I think that's what I think we're all trying to hit upon.
Okay.
Yeah,
Mik,
I totally
did you
agree
want
with
to
that.
add anything?
Sorry, Penny. I just want to say I totally agree with Naveen there, because the agile principles don't change. You still start small, increase the complexity with the regulatory and compliance aspects, and just iterate from there.
Okay, and understood. So moving now into the kind of, into the doing. If the goal for an insurer, say, is a sort of structured but flexible approach to deployment, Stephen, could you share an example of what that looks like, and what kind of makes it adaptable, and how, what that looks like in reality, from your client facing experience?
Yeah, I guess maybe there's two aspects to that. There's what's scalable and applicable to a wider number of people, and then what's adaptable to varying ways of working. So adapting software, adapting AI, adapting agents in some ways through a certain lens, it's little different than adapting new technologies of the past, when we had the internet for the first time and SaaS-based systems and. These vary for every role and every activity and for every context, which is really, really important. IT will prepare and adopt differently than high-value underwriting or high-volume claims because their context and their needs are different. If we look at the jobs to be done in order to be able to adopt them, aside from the tech, the jobs to be done are still broadly the same. Understanding the technology, its relevance, how to make good decisions about it. This can be supported by effective leadership training that targets executives and decision makers. This in turn helps to better identify the right problems to solve and the right opportunities to apply AI for and take advantage of. This then readies the risk and compliance posture. Next, we mobilize teams and we enable those teams appropriately. And then again, we start small, we test and we learn and we iterate forwards. And sometimes starting local will come out with better local team results that are really tangible rather than complete departmental or call center level. I think feature design, proof of concepts, architecture, dealing with data quality, data lineage, integration to data sources, quality and integrity validation, security controls, leakage, change management, adoption. The list is boring. It's a list that you're all very, very familiar with. The story is old as time. These activities are all required. It's just now they're enabled by their own tool set at every single stage in the SDLC. And I think that makes it quite cool. From an EPAM perspective, we have our own AI run framework that we use to guide our clients through this entire process, starting with assessment all the way through to execution. And it's the classics. It's people, it's process, and it's technology. And it's bringing that together in a cohesive manner.
On a very slight tangent, but still very much related, we've had another question. which I will read out. I'm not quite sure who would want to go first with this, but there's been some talk about initial POCs with vibe coding, etc. What are the big things to watch out for as you move into production? Is there a recognized playbook, or could the panelists point to some useful real-world examples? Mik?
Yeah, I can do it from a technical point of view, if you wish. So yes, you can
Yeah.
vibe code something up pretty quickly. I literally have just converted over the last 8 months a vibe coded app, and it was a bit of a mess. So visually it looked great. The code behind it was just spaghetti, right? Very hard to test, very hard to deploy.
Okay.
So when you go from vibe coded POC to figuring out the concept and transforming it into industrial strength, it can be deployed globally, resilient, etc. And everything is correct, like the non-negotiables like data integrity, security, etc. Then what you need to do is when you're converting it, assuming it hasn't happened in the POC, when something's been vibe coded up, because the impression is that it hasn't got its context managed to make sure that the code is good, the language inside it is used good. So for example, if you're doing domain-driven design, ubiquitous language, having modular code, that kind of thing, you can actually find skills and rules that will help you fix those. It will take some time, but I would go through, fix that all, and then start extending it.
Can I add, Penny? I think because Mik and I do a lot of vibe coding, don't be taken away by your own brilliance. The tools do a lot of the heavy lifting, and it's really, really
Isn't that half the fun of
it is exactly half the fun, and it should be fun as well. It's a huge learning activity, but we can spin up very detailed, very realistic underwriting workbenches for treaty reinsurance in just a couple of hours. As Mik rightly said, it's concept, and it's a beautiful concept, and it's really great. If you are ever bored, you want to teach yourself something, use one of the design tools to come up with a design, and then load it up and vibe it up. I want to teach myself to become an underwriter in marine insurance. Well, you can get the underwriting consoles right in front of you, going through the underwriting decision making. You can do this to pretty much every type of activity out there, and you can learn so much. But the code behind it's not fit. So be prepared to throw the vibe away, throw the proof of concept away, analyze it, get the large language models to analyze what you've done, write it up in a design document, and then start the proper work with the traditional IT and architecture controls.
Yeah, let me add one more thing. So the story I was telling you about there was I got handed over an app from someone who was non-technical. So if you are, say, a forward deployed engineer, or you are technical, it's very easy to set yourself up so that you already have all the context managed, like rules for good code, etc., before you even start, because you already know, right? So there is that path too.
Yeah, I just want to add, I think...
And well, I hope that... oh, sorry, Naveen.
Yeah, I was going to add, I think there's an element of this which is... So I'll give you this example, right? So too often when we talk about agents and underwriting, we talk about how it works today. But I've seen people use vibe coding as a way to demonstrate a paradigm that is different, right? So for example, today when I'm an underwriter, I'm getting all these codes and I'm serially going through and working on those codes. What if I could change the way an underwriter works? I log in, I ask the agent, what is it that I should work on today? And the agent has already gone through my list of all the codes, submissions that I have, identified the ones which will drive most revenue for me, align with whatever guidance my firm has, all of that stuff. Now, to visualize what that looks like and to get the business to see what the impact would be without spending too much money, it's an excellent way to jumpstart that whole process and get everybody on the same page. So that functionality of being able to see the possibilities and do it fast is, I think, the biggest benefit coming out here.
Okay, super. Thank you very much. So if you, going back to the, the point where a project is ongoing, if you're brought in by an enterprise leader who is kind of under pressure ROI, where would you recommend that is there a specific area you recommend that they focus first? I know we've talked about sort of starting small, quick wins, but where would you start? And is there anything in particular you'd steer them away from?
I'll take that one.
Stephen, did you?
Yeah, we see it quite a lot, and it's also in the press, it's in the news, and it's unavoidable. So yeah, it's understandable that spend needs to be appropriate and accounted for, and many are very, very reasonably seeking ROI. I think where we are today, the focus has generally been on efficiency gains and saving money. What we are seeing is that people are able to do more work more effectively when they have the right AI tooling and configuration in place. That this isn't always translating into savings, and I'll come back to that in a moment. So, for example, in underwriting, perhaps the tools enable less rekeying through data ingestion, or more detailed risk research and risk analysis. And perhaps this translates to processing more submissions in the submission queue and selecting better risks. This might improve the loss ratio in pockets of the portfolio where these tools and these underwriters are enabled and adopted. But it is hard to carve out the exact effect of AI investment from external factors and market conditions. It's more complicated than a very simple measurement. In software, the hype initially predicted the end of professional engineers, and we all cried. But even with the 20 to 40% end-to-end SDLC gains, we are now seeing a growing need for more engineers, and the job market in that area has actually picked up. These business objectives mean that there is more software to write, and backlogs are never ending. Neither translates directly, or easily at least, to ROI, but both have got significant advantage. So, to your question, there is a line of thinking that operational savings can only be demonstrated where there is a volume of transaction to amplify the impact of AI. If ROI is the primary focus, then only select use cases that can be clearly measured and where the volume is there to amplify it. I think there are a growing number of cases where ROI is being declared. And again, we're seeing it in the press, we're seeing it with partners. And as organizations mature, we expect that to increase beyond the piloting phase into that scale phase over the months and the years ahead.
Okay. Naveen, is there anything you
I would like to add to
sort of add in?
build on what Stephen was talking through. I think the key here, I think as I talk to different customers, I think the path we talked about, where start small, grow big, discover, experiment, scale, all that still exists. And I think Stephen hit on the key point here is what is that in the discovery? What is that AI that is actually going to move the EBITDA needle, right? Actually going to make a difference to the company. But as I talk about it, and I'm going to use terms that I've been using, but so I'll explain what they mean, right? So I see three clear buckets. The first bucket is deflection. So I have work that is done, like call center, I got calls coming in, I got tickets triage, I got first line questions. All of that for me is deflection. Those are easy wins, right? And the second one that comes through is acceleration. I call it acceleration, which is, I got claims process, I'm doing claims summarization, I'm doing FNOL capture, I'm doing code generation, I'm doing document ingestion, I'm creating the workbench, blah, blah, blah. And so that's the second aspect of it. The third aspect for me is augmentation, right? It's the highest value work where you're redesigning stuff, you're completely trying to change the operating model, huge value, right? But the challenge is for a customer who's just starting out on a journey, who has not got any experience with AI. For those, I would say, yes, stay away from augmentation step one, because it's the greatest thing possible. And you've done vibe coding and got a great demo for it, but you don't have the experience, right? Start with deflection. But for somebody who has already got the experience, then yes, go ahead, put your energy into acceleration, put your energy into augmentation. That's the conversation I normally ask them to focus on first.
Really interesting, isn't it? I have to say, I went to a presentation from a very well-known insurer recently about some of the work they've did around AI, and the whole question of ROI. I
think the key here is, traditionally in technology, we have always tried to do the analysis, say, what is the ROI? What is the return on investment? Is this matching my internal return rate, etc.? I think what is changing with AI is the risk of not doing anything and losing out is higher than the risk of actually implementing an AI project. So some of these conversations are changing where companies are saying, our competitors are getting so much far ahead of us that we have no choice but to participate in this journey, but to adopt AI and make improvements. Because if the competitors can use AI and do things faster, better, they can do risk management because they are able to get data better, they can do higher risk. That's a disadvantage. So it's no longer just a question of ROI. It's a question of, am I missing out on the advancements that's going on with AI?
Okay. So, Stephen, from your in-depth sort of client-side knowledge, what's the most candid thing you can potentially share about where enterprise clients might be struggling, that, perhaps things that they may not be willing to say publicly? What are the biggest gotchas?
Yeah, it's a catalogue that we're all learning from as we work with clients and we build up the anecdotes. Key themes: data quality issues, legacy technology that's difficult to integrate with as well, even overcoming perceptions of where the tech is appropriate and what it can do well versus where it should not be used. Just because AI is there doesn't mean we have to apply it to every single use case. And also how to implement it better. Everybody's in a learning curve and there's lots to learn because there's lots that's changing. I think also market hype is slowing down pragmatic adoption. You can read 4 articles in a row on a site or a paper, who reads papers these days, an article of your choice. One will say that AI is overhyped, one will say it's underhyped, one will say it's taking jobs, and one will say it has no impact. It's all being blown out of proportion. Insurance companies are told this will be the next big disruptor, and at the same time, they can't get the basic use cases to work properly. So I think as a result of this, there's emerging pressure on IT departments to become more efficient because my friend recreated a core policy administration system from a weekend of vibe coding in his bedroom. We've heard these types of conversations where somebody does some POCing and piloting and they demonstrate complex capabilities ridiculously quickly. And that's great. And it's fun, as we've all said, but it's also not related to that path to production that we've all been talking about. And I think containing the hype and getting back to basics as this wave of AI technologies sort of comes into our everyday lives is important. And I think also the final point I'd make is, for expectation management, investing in some AI licenses and some training courses for your people and maybe a few change initiatives, and then expecting the value from this to flow at an organizational level doesn't necessarily add up. We don't see too much org level change where people, process, data are reimagined with this new tooling and technology. The org change is the hard bit, not the agentic enablement with the right technologies that we've been discussing today. We're actively doing some of this today and we're learning from it and with some of our clients. So there is the appetite there. We're just not seeing that enough right now.
Okay. Mik, was there any kind of more technical aspects of that?
Well,
plenty, I imagine, especially the data.
Well, let's just say on a similar line, we've seen situations where, organization X will say, hey, I bought 300 licenses of insert agentic tool and where's my ROI, right? So it doesn't work like that. You can't just buy the tool. It's going to solve your problem. But I think the biggest challenge when designing a system is that the execs and business stakeholders see ChatGPT and Claude and think we could have that same level of capability targeted for their business context pretty much out of the box. But, those companies like OpenAI and Anthropic, they have investment rounds that are more than the market cap of some of the organizations we deal with. So it's kind of an unrealistic expectation.
Absolutely wild, the amount of money they still.
And the marketing hype's real, especially what Steve said, right? You just need to peek behind the scenes of the announcement, see what is it really that is going to suddenly disrupt legal, finance, whatever, to see how they've actually implemented it. And you see, you get the real story then.
So, I would want to round out where Stephen and Mik were talking about with things that I've heard from CIOs.
Sure.
It's been unspoken stuff. So for me, there are 3 things, right? And the first one actually is not 1, it's 2, right? So it's talent. First is talent. And talent both on the IT side, because some of the AI stuff is new. Putting it into production. How do you manage it? How do you do the SRE? What is the agent ops stuff? How do you, do check drift management? How do you do incidents? All of that stuff is stuff they're thinking about. On the business side, as underwriters and claims professionals now have agents that they're managing, there's training that needs to happen so they know how to effectively use all these agents. So that's the talent side. The second side is the internal alignment, right, for CIOs. Who owns the agent? Who pays for the tokens? Tokens are getting to be a big cost. And who's accountable if something goes wrong? And all of these things are the second thing that CIOs generally think through. And thirdly, and I think I would say this is the one that is the one that most people don't want to talk about, and that is a lot of people, the CIOs, suspect that their data estate isn't really where it is, and they think AI will compensate for it. Actually, in practice, when they go with AI, it will expose those gaps rather than hide them. And so I think those are things that require CIOs to focus on discipline, and those who lean into it now will do better than those who think it'll resolve by itself.
Brilliant. Okay, time is ticking on, so I'm going to ask you to very quickly answer the last question, which is, I'm going to ask you to get your crystal balls out. 12 to 18 months down the line, what is going to be separating the customers who have successfully scaled some pilots? And what's one thing, if you can all find one thing that IT leaders should be doing right now to make sure that they're in that first group? So Naveen, do you want to go first?
Sure, I'll do that. I think frontier insurers will look fundamentally different across 3 dimensions. And the first one is performance. You'll have end-to-end claims, underwriting redesigned around AI. You'll have shorter cycles. You'll have visible impact in EBITDA. I talked about Bain talking about this as being a 10 to 25% opportunity. The second aspect is going to be the people side. I think the operating models will shift to hybrid, human plus agents. You'll have trained agent bosses, both on the claim side and the underwriting side. And I believe the third one, which is interesting, is going to be prevention. So you're going to start using AI to shift from paying claims to preventing losses. So in the Microsoft side, we're looking at AI, climate grade AI like Aurora and Sparrow, etc. So those are the things that will close out this protection gap. Now, what should leaders do today? So in my mind, what they should do today is they need to, and we have talked about this multiple times. I think all 3 of us have said this. Take one high volume workflow, take it all the way to production with full governance, and invest in that operating model redesign now. I think the model layer will keep changing, but those who industrialize this discipline will be untouchable by 2028.
Super. Mik, one thought from you.
Yeah, I'll just finish off by saying everything that Naveen said is accurate, and I would totally support it. And I would say it's important to remember small changes compound over time. So starting now is a good idea.
Yeah, that's a great point. Stephen?
Ditto, exactly the same. I think we've mentioned token economics. It's going to change in the next while ahead. There's techniques to manage it. Start learning those techniques as well. Legacy will always be a challenge. We've got to start working that legacy problem. I know that everybody is, but we've got to start working that legacy and their data challenge. And yes, get started. Start small, think big, get going.
Crack on. Well, I think that's a great place, a really powerful place to land. So the gap between those who scale and those who stall isn't going to come down just to the tech alone. It's going to come down to leadership, governance, the willingness to say start small, and perhaps make some difficult decisions earlier on. I want to say a huge thank you to our 3 panelists today, Stephen, Mik and Naveen. You've given us a really practical view of what this journey can look like from the inside, and I'm sure you've left our viewers with plenty to think about. To our audience, thank you very much for joining us and for your questions. As I mentioned earlier, if we didn't get to your question today, we will make sure it reaches the right person and you'll hear back directly. If you'd like to continue the conversation, whether that is exploring what a production-ready AI architecture might look like for your organization, or understanding how EPAM and Microsoft can support your journey from pilot to scale, then please do get in touch and we can direct you to the right place. A recording of today's webinar will be available, so please do feel free to share with colleagues who weren't able to join us live. From me, Penny Horwood, and from our wonderful panel, thank you very much and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.